Have you ever looked at an old photograph and wondered about the stories hidden within? Take this wedding picture from 1910. It looks perfectly normal, right? A happy couple, their families, a celebration frozen in time. But what if I told you this single photograph holds a secret that remained unsolved for over a century? A secret hidden in plain sight, a coded message that could rewrite a family's history. My name is Alex, and I'm a historical researcher. I spend my days digging through archives, looking for forgotten stories. I stumbled upon this photo in a dusty box of unsorted documents at a small local museum. It belonged to the Hayes family, prominent merchants in the early 20th century. The bride, Eleanor, and the groom, Thomas. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I noticed something strange about the bride's bouquet. The arrangement of the flowers, roses, lilies, and forget-me-not seemed almost deliberate, too perfect. Now, I'm not a botanist, but I am obsessed with puzzles, so I started digging into the Victorian language of flowers, also known as florography. It was a way for people back then to send secret messages using bouquets. A red rose meant I love you, but a yellow carnation meant disdain. It was the covert texting of its time. So, I began to decode Eleanor's bouquet. Rose, lily, forget-me-not, standard wedding choices. But then I looked closer at the smaller flowers tucked in between. A sprig of lavender for distrust, a stalk of foxglove for insincerity, and most chillingly, a sprig of oleander, which means beware. This was no ordinary wedding bouquet. It was a warning. Eleanor was trying to tell someone something, but who and why? I went back to the archives, this time looking for anything related to the Hayes wedding. I found letters, diaries, and newspaper clippings. Thomas Hayes was presented as a charming, successful businessman. But Eleanor's diary told a different story. The entries leading up to the wedding were filled with anxiety. She wrote about Thomas's controlling nature, his sudden temper, and his suspicious business dealings. She felt trapped. The coded bouquet suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't a message of love. It was a desperate cry for help. I then turned my attention to the other people in the photograph. Who was the intended recipient of this silent message? My eyes landed on a young woman standing just behind Eleanor. Her name was Clara, Eleanor's younger sister. In her own diary, Clara mentioned her concern for Eleanor and her deep suspicion of Thomas. The sisters were incredibly close. The message was for her. The wedding went ahead, and on the surface, everything seemed fine. But just 6 months later, Thomas Hayes's business collapsed in a massive fraud scandal. He was ruined. The interesting part, the anonymous tip that led to the investigation came just weeks after the wedding. I found a record of a letter sent to the authorities, detailing Thomas's illicit activities with uncanny precision. The handwriting matched Clara's perfectly. Clara had understood the message. The bouquet wasn't just a warning, it was a call to action. She used her knowledge of Thomas's affairs, likely shared by Eleanor in secret, to expose him and free her sister from a dangerous marriage. Eleanor eventually divorced Thomas and moved away with Clara, the two sisters starting a new life together. This single photograph, what seemed like a simple memento of a happy day, was actually the key to a century-old mystery. It was a testament to a sister's love and the quiet courage of a woman who used the language of her time to fight back. It just goes to show you, history is full of secrets, and sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that are never spoken aloud. What secrets might be hiding in your own family photos? Thanks for joining me on this journey into the past. If you love uncovering hidden histories like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our next investigation. See you next time. The danger was closing in. Word had come that they were looking for my sister Ruth. I do not know what she did or did not do, but it did not matter. When they came for one of us, guilt was decided before any trial. There was no trial, only rope and fire. Denise's hands trembled as she turned the pages. A plan had been made. Ruth would leave that night. The gardeners had prepared the way, but I had to stay behind. My wedding was in 3 months. My bouquet would be the signal. The flowers I carried would tell everyone who saw the photograph. Ruth was gone. The path was clear. She was safe. Denise looked at the wedding portrait again. The bride was Bessie, and her bouquet was a message to an entire network, confirming that her sister had escaped. But escaped from what? The journal revealed the full horror of the spring of 1910. Ruth had worked as a seamstress for a white family in town, the only employment paying more than field labor available to black women. She was skilled, quiet, and careful. She knew the rules of survival in the Jim Crow South. Never look a white person in the eye. Never speak unless spoken to. Never give anyone a reason to notice you. None of it mattered when the teenage son accused Ruth of stealing a silver brooch. Ruth had not stolen it. The brooch was later found hidden beneath the boy's mattress. But the accusation had already spread. Word spread through the white community like wildfire, growing more distorted with each retelling. Within days, the story had escalated. Whispers of improper behavior, of a black woman who had forgotten her place. A group of men began gathering, plotting to teach a lesson. Bessie learned of it from a shopkeeper who warned, "Get your sister out tonight." That night, Ruth vanished. The gardeners had arranged everything, a wagon at the edge of town. safe houses along the route north, contacts in Atlanta to help her board a train to Chicago. Within a week, Ruth was beyond the reach of the men who wanted to kill her, but the danger was not over. The mob was furious that their target had escaped. They demanded answers. Someone must have helped her. Someone must know where she went. Bessie's family was questioned, threatened, and their home searched, but they revealed nothing. The code held. 3 months later, Bessie married James, a deacon in Reverend Isaiah's father's church. She walked down the aisle carrying a bouquet that communicated the entire network. Ruth was safe. The mission complete. The Gardners had succeeded. Denise continued reading the journal. With each page, the scope of the Gardners network became clearer. Bessie had not been a passive participant. She had been a key member, using her position in the community to gather information and coordinate escapes. The journal documented dozens of operations over the years, men and women spirited away in the night, warned of impending violence, or hidden until danger passed. Some had been accused of crimes they did not commit. Others had drawn the wrong kind of attention: a black man to successful in business, a black woman who rejected a white employer. The Gardners operated with military precision. Scouts monitored white gatherings for signs of trouble. Safe houses were spaced along routes north. Contacts in Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit provided jobs and housing for those who escaped. They communicated through flowers. Each arrangement was a sentence in a silent language. Red amaranth in windows signaled imminent danger. White oleander on graves meant a route was clear. Yellow acacia in wreaths identified trusted allies. Blue salvia at funerals, weddings, and church events confirmed messages had been received. To outsiders, these were simple decorations. To those in the know, they were lifelines. Denise realized the wedding photograph was not just a personal memento. It was a historical document, evidence of a resistance movement that had operated in plain sight for decades. But the archives could only tell so much. To understand the full story, she needed to speak with descendants of Bessie's family. Tracing the genealogy through census records, marriage certificates, and obituaries, Denise discovered that Reverend Isaiah, whose collection contained the photograph, was Bessie's grandson. She located living relatives in Georgia, Chicago, and California. She reached out, explaining her research and asking for family stories. The response was overwhelming. Many had heard fragments of the story, whispered references to relatives who had escaped north with help from a secret network. But no one had ever put the pieces together. One call stood out. Gloria, a 91-year-old woman in Chicago, had information Denise needed. "I knew Bessie," Gloria said. "She was my grandmother, and I know about the flowers. She taught me when I was a girl before she died. She said it was important to remember, even if we hoped never to use it again." Denise flew to Chicago, surrounded by family photographs spanning nearly a century. She listened as Gloria told her story. "The bouquet in that wedding picture saved my great-aunt Ruth's life. But it also nearly destroyed our family, because the men who wanted Ruth never stopped looking for answers." Gloria's story revealed a chapter of family history too painful and dangerous to write down. After Ruth's escape, the mob's fury turned toward those left behind. They could not prove that Bessie's family had helped Ruth disappear, but suspicion alone was enough. Over the following months, the family faced a campaign of terror. Their barn was burned, their livestock killed, threatening notes left on their doorstep. James, Bessie's husband, was beaten by masked men who warned him to keep his wife in line. But the family did not break. They stayed and continued their work with the Gardners, even as the danger grew. Gloria explained, leaving would have been a betrayal. They had built something important, a way to save lives. If they ran, who would take their place? Who would carry the flowers? The persecution continued for years, but gradually faded. The white men who had sought Ruth grew old or moved away. New concerns replaced old grudges, and the family survived, quietly continuing their work. Bessie lived until 1967, reaching 90 years old, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. In her final years, she began teaching the flower code to the youngest generation, not because she expected them to need it, but because she believed memory was sacred. She said the flowers were our ancestors' gift to us, Gloria said, tears streaming down her face, a way of protecting each other when no one else would. "She made me promise to remember, and I have. All my life I have remembered." But what had happened to Ruth, the sister whose escape had sparked everything? Denise asked Gloria, and the old woman smiled. "Ruth lived," she said simply. "She had a long, full life." The Gardner network had brought her safely to Chicago in the spring of 1910. Arriving with only the clothes on her back and a contact-us address, she found work as a seamstress. Within a year, she had established herself and she married William, a Pullman porter. They had 4 children. Ruth never returned to Georgia. It was too dangerous. The men who had wanted to kill her remembered, but she stayed connected to her family through the network, sending messages by flowers delivered by trusted couriers. Each arrangement carried news of her health, happiness, and growing family. Bessie received these messages and replied in kind. The two sisters maintained a silent conversation for decades. They finally reunited in 1952, after the last of the men who had threatened them had died. Ruth traveled to Georgia for a family reunion. Walking into her sister's home after 42 years, they simply held each other and cried. No words, just tears. Bessie pulled out a bouquet she had prepared, the same flowers from her wedding portrait. She gave it to Ruth and said, "You're finally home." Denise published her research the following year. The story of Bessie, Ruth, and the Gardners captured national attention. Historians praised it as a significant contribution to understanding Black resistance during the Jim Crow era. Bessie's wedding photograph, once overlooked in an archive, became a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and survival. For the descendants, the impact was personal. Denise organized a reunion of both branches of the family, those who had stayed in Georgia and those who had built lives in the North. Over 100 people gathered in Atlanta, meeting cousins they had never known and hearing stories never before told. Gloria, now 92, addressed the group. Our grandmothers and great-grandmothers lived in a time when loving each other was an act of resistance. They could not march in the streets or vote, but they could carry flowers. They could send messages. They could save each other's lives, one secret signal at a time. That is our inheritance. That is who we are. The family established a foundation in Bessie and Ruth's names, dedicated to preserving the history of Black resistance and supporting communities affected by racial violence. The logo featured for flowers, red amaranth, white oleander, yellow acacia, and blue salvia arranged in a circle. The Gardners' secret language had become a public symbol of hope. On the anniversary of Bessie's wedding, June 14, 112 years later, the family gathered at her grave in rural Georgia. The headstone was simple, weathered by decades, but a new bronze plaque displayed the 4 flowers of the Gardners' code. Descendants placed fresh flowers on the grave, real red amaranth, white oleander, yellow acacia, and blue salvia, the same arrangement Bessie had carried in 1910. Maya, one of Ruth's great-great-granddaughters, read a letter she had written. "Dear Bessie, you never met me, but I am here because of you. Because you stayed when it would have been safer to run. Because you carried flowers that told my great-great-grandmother the path was clear. Because you kept the secret for 60 years until it was safe for your sister to come home. I am proof that your sacrifice mattered. My children will be proof, and their children after them. The message you sent has been received not just by Ruth, but by all of us. We hear you. We remember you. We will carry your flowers forward." The wind stirred the blossoms, scattering petals across the grass. For a moment, it seemed as if the photograph had come to life. The bride in her white dress, the bouquet in her hands, her eyes shining with joy. A century of silence had ended. A secret written in flowers had finally been read. Some photographs capture a moment, others carry a message across time. Bessie's message had been received and would never be forgotten.